The Bob Murphy Show, episode 343.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bob Murphy Show. Today I'm going to be speaking with Allie Clough, who is, how should I describe? Well, she's been someone that I've been following on Twitter and vice versa for a while now. She's a fan of the Austrian school, and specifically what I wanted to have her come on and talk about is she often gets into the the men versus women debates that rage on Twitter, and I just realized this when I was trying to figure out what am I going to say to motivate this episode. I often agree with her takes. Even when I don't agree with her takes, it's because I think she, maybe being younger than me, is too sympathetic in her treatment of a particular issue and is giving too many people the benefit of the doubt, put it that way. So even when I disagree with her, it's like I feel that, it'd be better if the world were the way you're saying here, Allie, but I just don't think it is. All right, and so the best analogy I can come up with is it's sort of like how I think the right take when it comes to things like, who do you side with in Israel versus Palestine? And like the correct thing is to say, well, anyone who's doing something wrong on either side is wrong, and in general, I hope the best for people, and large-scale conflict is bad, and like that's kind of how Allie's take is when it comes to people with their horrible dating stories or generalizations they make about, oh, this is how men are or this is how women are. You got to watch out, right? So anyway, I thought this would be a fun break from the normal fare on the Bob Murphy Show. But besides her commentary on all matters of the battles between the sexes, Allie does a lot of work on, I guess, call it free market environmentalism, and so we also talk about that at the tail end of the discussion. So here it is, my discussion with Allie Clough. Allie, welcome to the Bob Murphy Show.
Thank you for having me.
So, folks, I may have said a little bit of this in the pre-recorded intro, but in case I didn't dwell on it, let me mention, normally what I do with these things is I do the broccoli first, and then we get into the dessert. And so, we're going to be talking about Allie's got some credentials and background work she does for Conserve America on environmental issues. And she, I saw her down at the Mises Institute. She's coming at these things from an Austro, free market perspective. And so normally that's what I do. But lately in discussing with social media, placement ad agencies and so forth, they say, no, you got to hook people on the front end with the real fun stuff, and then they can stick around. So we're going to start. And it's not just because Allie's younger than me and female, but she talks a lot on Twitter, or some call it X, about, the battle between the sexes and social issues and dating advice for young, lonely men, that kind of stuff. So that's why we're starting. This is not stereotypical. She talks about this stuff. And so that's why I'm having her on to hit some of these issues. So maybe, Allie, just like out of the gate here, I know one of the things you talk about is you don't like these dating apps. So what's your problem with them?
I think in general, a lot of the issues with dating apps are that they seem like they're mirroring the real world, but they're not. There's a huge gender skew, for example, which I think is something that's not talked about enough. It's effectively just skewing the population so that there's way more men on your average dating app than there are women, which I think inflates women's egos artificially and deflates men's egos. And I think a lot of men seem pretty tuned into the fact that women's egos are a little bit out of control sometimes on dating apps, but I don't think what they realize is that theirs are a lot lower than they should be. And that a lot of that is just a function of the fact that it's not one-to-one the way that it is in real life.
Okay, let me see if I got what you. So you're saying on these dating apps for various reasons, and maybe actually in a minute you can give your theories to why, but empirically it is the case that more men are on dating apps than women. So as one might expect, especially as an economist, that means there's more guys chasing the fewer women. And so the women can be more picky and be more selective. And, you know, the women are getting showered with attention and, you know, whether being picked and matched or so forth. And so that leads the men on average to think, oh, I'm not good enough. Whereas the women had this inflated sense of, oh, wow, I'm getting courted by more people than would be the case if I went to a bar where maybe the ratios would be closer to 50-50. Is that the spirit of what you're saying?
100%. And
Okay.
I think those ratios are kind of already a little bit off in real life. When we think about just the fact that a guy coming up to you at the bar is not a marriage proposal, it's him probably trying to sleep with you. Maybe he just wants to talk or something.
Mm-hmm.
But on dating apps, that's magnified, partly by the algorithms. I mean, they're not designed to get you off of them. These apps only profit from having users, which I think everyone understands by now. But also because it keeps women on there. These apps are really hungry for female users because it's very hard to get them. Bumble, for example.
Can I just ask? So,
Yeah.
and I'm not feigning ignorance, folks. I don't use these things, so I don't know. But what is it? I mean, is there stuff that, like, is it like you're having conversations with, you know, like if you're some guy and you log in, is it like you have 20 different conversations that are going on and once in a while you actually have a date with somebody? Like, is that what you mean by being on the app, is because you're spending time flirting with people, or is that not what you mean?
Yeah, I mean just like having a profile period.
Okay.
Being an active user, actively using it.
But
I think if you talk to the average guy, they're not messaging.
Forgive me,
each other.
Ellie. This is what I'm trying to pin down.
Yeah.
When you say use it, though, is it merely just coordinating and, you know, swipe left or swipe right, and then once in a while you actually get a date and you go out every once in a while? Or to, quote, use it, does that mean you're actively messaging people back and forth? And, like, is that the preamble to possibly meeting with? Like, in other words, are there various stages of first, what do you both, or maybe the different apps have different ways of doing it, but like, do both parties have to express a mutual interest and then communication can occur and then possibly okay. And then there's a period of
match and then you can message, and usually people use that as a way to either go out or get each other's numbers.
Okay. All right. And so are there ads on there, or is it just you pay a flat fee to be part of it, or how's that work?
Most of them are ad-based, but a lot of them have freemium models. So they'll have paid users, almost always men, that give you extra privileges. Like you could message somebody, I think, on some of them if you haven't matched with them, and you can kind of like cold call them, so to say.
But you got to pay extra for that ability?
Yeah.
And what is it like the women don't have to pay? Is it kind of like ladies' night at the bar or something, like because they want women on there and the men are the ones that subsidize it all? Is that how it works? Or
it's not that women don't have to pay, it's that women have no incentive to pay. Typically, a man's typical experience is either not getting matches at all, and he's kind of swiping forever and nobody matches with him. And I've seen men literally just like sit with their phone and rapid fire through. Whereas a woman's experience is probably that she's overwhelmed by the number of matches, and can't message them all back, and is like deleting people or getting pickier and pickier, trying to narrow them down. So women don't really have an incentive to pay to get more matches.
Okay, but that's what I meant. So you're saying it's the freemium model where you pay to be able to cold call.
Yeah,
that's what you're saying. Okay, but are there any apps where women actually have to just pay the standard fee just to get on in the first place, or that's not a thing?
I don't, at least not among the popular ones.
Right. I mean, that would make sense to me. That's what the commodity. That's what it's doing. It's facilitating, like, that's the house, and people are trying to buy a house or something, like, to make it crude. Okay.
And it's ads, and they're a lot of times selling or analyzing chat data, which I'm sure people.
I didn't even.
A lot of times don't realize about dating apps that you're selling quite a lot of personal data. Also, the online talk therapy, BetterHelp, and you might get ads for things like that, depending on what your Google search history looks like recently. Those are also not profitable if you're just selling $50 therapy sessions. People are like legitimately, including selling therapy notes. They've gotten sued for it. So it's some of it's ads, but a lot of it is literally just them creeping on you.
Okay, interesting. All right, so it's in their incentive to do that, and then again, just to understand the mechanics of it. So on a typical, and again, if there's different ones, then you need to clarify and make it more nuanced. But so what a woman's profile's up there, many men express interest, and then what? When she logs in, she sees the whole archive of all these guys expressed interest. Do you want to reciprocate among this menu? Is that how it works?
Typically, she sees a shuffled deck. And
Okay.
so what the app will often do is insert men in there, sometimes that have already like rejected her. And the app will shuffle them all together. So it feels like it's a casino mindset because they want to get that dopamine hit for the woman.
Mm-hmm.
So that you're going through a lot of, 6 foot tall Navy SEAL looking guys.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them have liked you, usually the ones that are probably, not the ones that are crazy out of your league. And so you're kind of going through a mixed bag. But as you're swiping, usually the woman is maybe 1 in 3 times getting a positive feedback match.
Okay. All right. And so do you have any theory? Like I'm guessing like you don't have a problem. Like, hey, people who, I have a couch I'm trying to get rid of. Wow. The internet really makes that easier than it used to be. How come just meeting somebody to, go on a date with, like, isn't the internet connecting people and just reducing transaction costs? I'm being a bit tongue in cheek. Like
No,
I think I agree with you, but I'm just saying prima facie, why would this be a problem? What could go wrong?
Yeah, I think the main issue is that you kind of enter into this mindset where you think that is how you're supposed to date. And we've had a lot of attacks on kind of traditional dating with things like Me Too and getting hypersensitive to women being approached. So dating apps are really one of the only places that you have like de facto consent. Everyone is there to date. It's actually okay to ask women out. So we're kind of seeing this scope narrowing where it's the only place that you're allowed to ask women out. And yet it's like highly asymmetric compared to what real life is like. So I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with meeting somebody online. The problem is that it's very difficult to do that with apps that are designed to get inside your head, designed for women to make you feel like you have kind of this casino effect of never-ending options, and designed for men, honestly, just to be really, really demoralizing. Or at least that's their effect. So I don't know. I have a lot of friends who are on the apps. I think some of them use them really responsibly and kind of mix them in with real life dating. But I think in general, if you're not using them really consciously, it's kind of like if you put your couch on Facebook Marketplace and they artificially inflated the offers that you'd get and then they all fell through. You're going to keep the price really high because you think that you can actually get $1,000 for that piece of crap futon. But if Facebook Marketplace actually benefited from people not selling their couches, that's kind of what we're looking at with dating apps. It's a market that is not supposed to be functioning.
Now, do you just mean because for the narrow reason that, two people that do find each other and end up in a long-term relationship aren't using the dating app anymore, so it's actually in the interest of it to keep you single? Is that what you mean?
Yes, genuinely.
Okay.
And I'm sure there's exceptions. I know there's a couple different platforms that are really trying more of a matchmaking model. Some of them are trying like bounties where they only get paid if you get married, and then you get, you pay like $50,000 or something crazy. I think they're interesting concepts, and they genuinely are, I guess, attacking the market problem in an interesting way. That's not the average dating app. The average dating app is a swipe app that really, really, really benefits from hookup culture. They benefit from people going on one date, sleeping together, feeling icky about it, and not talking, and then needing to go on another date.
Okay, that you just anticipated. That was going to be my follow-up, is to say, wouldn't really if you really were just, putting morals aside, you're just trying to make money and don't care about people, wouldn't the ideal thing be that, yes, the average guy knows that, there's a once in a while I actually do, have a one night stand with somebody, and then that, the frequency can be pretty low, and that's better than going to the bar, 10 times in, a weekend or 10 weekends in a row. And, if one of them hits, that's pretty good for most guys. And so that this is a way to do that.
And it's cheaper.
Yes.
Because most of them aren't paying for dating apps.
Right.
It's cheaper.
Right.
You also don't get rejected to your face, or you don't know if you're getting rejected really, because you're not sure, a woman can say no via a message,
Mhm.
but what a lot of these things are doing is kind of removing the rejection from the process, because you're really only going to get connected unless you're paying to bypass that. You're only going to get connected with people who've already given you a thumbs up.
Okay, yeah, because I mean that's probably what, like 90. I'm making this number. What does that even mean? But a big chunk of the thing is when,
Yeah,
oh, I kind of
here's
like
the deal.
her. Like if you know somebody from real life that you're in different, you're in circles that overlap, and oh, I like her, but does she just think I'm a friend? And you kind of timidly, and you're not sure, and that sort of thing. And it's real awkward, and so yeah, with this, it's more anonymous, and like you said at the beginning, like everyone knows why we're here. This isn't,
Yeah.
oh yeah, we're in a film class together, and hey, do you want to study for the exam? And really, you're hoping something else happens, but maybe
You
she's
study
like,
for felt
no.
exams?
Yeah, I'm making up stuff here. Okay, all right, so I get that, and yeah, I mean, suppose that if some executive does call you in and they say, we've been looking at your post and we saw you on the Bob Murphy show, as most people do because it's a huge show, and we're in this for the money. This does have to be profitable, but it's not helping us if our customers are miserable. So what can we do? And you can choose, Allie, if you wanted to say, no, I don't want to help these people, or if you want to say, well, what they could do to make it better is blah, blah, blah. Like, is there anything to get around some of these issues?
I think if they genuinely cared about, making people get into relationships, and to be clear, I don't think they do. Most of the apps have run actual campaigns hyping up hookup culture. Bumble ran a huge campaign talking about like how you shouldn't have to settle down, which is kind of insane coming from an app that purports to be for serious relationships, but I digress. If they actually wanted to encourage people to get together, one, I think they would probably limit matches. The League is an app that I had done years and years ago, and they literally only give you 3 people a day.
Okay.
After that, you have to get off, or you can click around or talk to the people that you've already matched with, but you can't just swipe forever. So you really take a strong look at those people and see whether or not you're compatible. The same app did video speed dating like once a week or something like that. And they would kind of dump you into a 3-minute call. The call would shut off at the end of 3 minutes, and you guys would only be matched if you had both given a thumbs up to one another.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a lot better data, even just chatting with somebody, kind of getting their demeanor a little bit, than you get from what's effectively a baseball card of a human being. I mean,
yeah.
I don't think that women should be judging based on a guy's height or something, but what else do you have to judge him on? It's a face picture. A lot of men don't have great pictures. His height, probably his job or his education or something. Like you have very limited data. Meanwhile, you don't want men to judge you on your looks, but again, it's like 6 photos of you. What else are they supposed to judge you on? You can't really show your personality. So I think any sort of live or even in-person element, and then just limiting the quantity of people. I think we've kind of become faithless to one another, which social media obviously does to us anyway, but dating apps kind of add to the romantic sphere of life in, I think, a pretty detrimental way. And I think that's where a lot of the really crappy treatment of one another comes from, is when you see people like recyclable baseball cards where you can get 10 more tomorrow if you want.
Right. And I mean, does this reinforce too is the term hypergamy? I think that's what I want, where there's like a few guys that are, getting many, many dates, and it's like for those kind of, I don't want to use the term alpha male, but that's really good for them. And then the attractive women, so one guy is like dating 10 really attractive women or something like that. And is that kind of the thing? And so any attractive woman's going to be fine in any environment. She's not going to have trouble finding a guy, but in general, the men, when this sort of thing that facilitates hookup culture, it's the average guy actually loses out. And it's more like, the 6'4" rugged guy who's also a millionaire. He's probably going to do pretty well.
This is kind of a hot take that I think I disagree with a lot of this crowd on. I think it's a little bit overblown, the idea that you can even rank men in order. Partly because, and this is just from general sexual psychology, women tend to have much broader tastes in men. We did an experiment in one of my sex psych classes where he separated the men and the women. This was, I guess, back in the days when you were allowed to do that, or was at a Christian college, so you could. But he gave us one board where he said, all right, women, like write down your ideal man, and then have the guys do it on another board. And I think the women had like 200 different adjectives by the end of 10 minutes. And it was, I like skinny guys, I like buff guys, I like dad bods, whatever. And then on the other side, there was one column where it was like long hair, big boobs, skinny, whatever. And then another column where they wrote down the attributes of our female professor, which I think was them trying to get extra credit.
I like it. All right.
It was like purple cardigan or something. But point being that I think like the women only date the top 10% of men really fails when you consider that there isn't just a set top 10% of men.
Okay.
I think men would line themselves up that way, thinking of a really buff guy who's American Psycho. I don't know. I've never actually seen that movie, but like I get the sense that he's like a finance bro or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's what's his name? Christian Bale, right? Like it's the guy who plays Batman. It's him, and yeah, he's a real narcissistic, finance guy. Yep.
And I think that's what people are picturing when they're like, oh, that's the 10% of men. Meanwhile, women, like I have friends who are going out with the skeezy looking bartender and he's got a freaking man bun and zero meat on his bones. I'm like, I would never. You've got other women who are super into like yoga, spiritual guys. It's never been my type. I think women have many different types. I do think what the hypergamy argument touches on really well, though, is this idea that women are a lot of times they'll match with someone or they'll go on a date with someone and they'll assume that that is kind of an offer of commitment. When in reality, it's an offer to sleep with you most of the time. And a lot of these guys, if they view themselves as out of your league or if they really are out of your league, they're still very happy to sleep with you. Women view that as great, wonderful. Like he just has commitment issues. And once I convince him of that, we'll be all set. And I think that's where that's what's driving a lot of hookup culture is women sleeping with men who are not actually commitment wise interested in them. And men who are very happy, obviously, to at least most of them, to capitalize on that. I don't think that's as strict and clean as those infographics with like 90% of women, just lines drawn to 10% of men on the other side of the screen. I just don't think that humans are as linear as that. Maybe that's how men see women slightly more, which I'd be slightly more inclined to believe. But I don't know. I'll probably get skewered for that one on Twitter, but
okay,
it's another day on X.
No, that's fair enough, but that's probably true that what men's views on what, an idea or a like, when they rate like, oh, she's an 8 or a 9 or a 10, normally it's not, because look at how well she did, contributing to the sociology literature. Like that's, you know what I mean? Exactly. Whereas some women is like, oh, wow, he's like, I'm really into musicians or something, or like, oh wow, that guy, his poetry is amazing or something, and some other guy might think, what, that guy could kick that guy's ass or whatever. But anyway, okay.
Yeah, I mean, Miss Universe exists for a reason, and it's because you don't even necessarily need to speak the same language as the women. Like you can just tell who's really beautiful. Right. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and even though like a cynical guy might say, oh yeah, like men like, stereotypical women with certain body types and whatever, and women just like guys who are rich, but actually, like you're saying, that's not the case. Like it's also a thing that, oh, women can fall in love with the poor struggling artist, and some other guy, some nice guy might be like, why does she keep, dating those losers that drive motorcycles but can't keep a job? So it's not because they're all with money. Like there's something else going on. Yeah.
And a lot of times it's status within a certain community is, I think, probably, if I had to be cynical, what I'd boil it down to. I mean, if he's, a struggling artist, it's probably because he's a really cool, like grunge guitarist or something. And he has status within that specific community. I mean, same with like the way that frats work, for example. Right. And I think wealth is a very straightforward one. So obviously, like, I'm not arguing that women are into rich men. I think that's a very common one. But there's also a lot of women that would probably date Ryan Gosling, regardless of whether or not he were rich, because he's Ryan Gosling. Or I don't know, trying to come up with Danny DeVito. like maybe an unattractive guy who's like got a lot of name recognition. Sorry to Danny, but it's a status thing.
I'm pretty sure he watches this podcast, and so hopefully,
I'm sure he's one of your greatest fans.
Yes. Okay, you said something earlier that we could elaborate on. You know, that this is a thing where it's safe. Like, no one's going to yell at you for trying to approach a woman in this context, whereas in other areas that is the case. And putting aside the Me Too stuff, which is in general, I have noticed over the years that I'll see, women online, and often though ones I actually know personally, and some of them will be like, geez, why are guys such cowards? Like, I go out with my friends, and if we're all dolled up and like they're terrified, they don't even approach us. What are we supposed to do? I don't want to have to go ask the guy out. But then also other women that I know personally, I've seen them vent online, like don't these guys come up, and approach me like I'm in the middle, like I'm dealing with my mom's health issues. I don't want some guy trying to get in my pants. And it's sort of like,
what do you want them to do?
Understand how, sometimes like some men are like, what are we supposed to do? And then the response is, well, you figure it out. You're supposed to be the man. You know what I mean? Like, we got to tell you everything. So anyway, it just seems like there's a lot of mixed signals going on here. So any reaction to that?
There's a lot of mixed signals going on. And I do think that Me Too, and in particular, the way that it's represented online, has messed with a lot of men's heads. Mm-hmm. I think that kind of the perceived worst case scenario has gotten a lot worse. Indeed, the real worst case scenario has gotten worse. I think there are certainly people who had Me Too moments who were legitimately assaulted, but there were a lot of victims kind of in the wake of just getting false accusations or overblown accusations, things like that. And so I think for a lot of men, especially much younger ones who've genuinely never approached a woman in their life, it's not that they've personally had a bad experience. It's that their only perception of the experiences to have are really, really negative ones, because that's also what's overblown online. That said, I genuinely can't blame them, because even in a lot of the sort of middle case scenarios, it's something as simple as you DMing a girl and she sends it, puts you on blast, sends it out to all of Twitter, sends it to her group chats.
Right.
No, you didn't get accused of sexual assaults or anything, but it's still humiliating in a way that approaching a woman in person and her saying, I'm not interested, it's 10 times worse than that, because it's just getting blown up. Maybe it got sent out to your high school or your college or whatever. I would also say that one of the things that I've noticed talking to my grandmas or talking to older women that I don't think a lot of younger women understand is that just because guys are pursuing doesn't mean that you sit there like a lame duck. My grandma's a huge football fan, and she always says, she's like, ladies, you got to put your hands up for the pass, which I think is a very good analogy. My late grandpa was very, very, very nerdy, and she basically described their meeting as, yeah, I saw him in the corner and figured he needed a wife, so I went up to him and had him ask me out. And sure, he initiated, but I think they were probably two of the last singles left in Minnesota at the time, and she just decided that's what was about to happen. And I think that's a little bit of a lost art among women, because you've got kind of this return to tradition, like female movement of, well, men used to be men and they used to just ask us out, which I don't think is entirely false. Like, I do think that there is an element of, yeah, we do need to just get a little less rejection sensitive. At the same time, probably the easiest way for that to happen is for women to be a little bit inviting, put your hands up for the pass. I don't know. I feel like personally, I've had a lot of guys kind of approach, and I think it's mostly because I am talkative. I mean, clearly I don't shut up, but like I have the opposite of resting biatch face. Like I think that when you're not scaring people off, and this is pros and cons, because I get harassed by panhandlers all the time. It doesn't matter what city I'm in. But I think when you're kind of inviting, even just in a friendly way, to other people, you're going to make people feel a little bit more at ease and less rejection sensitive. But I don't know. Ultimately, like, I don't think we're going to have some mass movement from top down. Like, I think everybody just has to figure out what you're able to do on your own basis. And for women, that's being a little warmer, a little more inviting. Like if you like a guy, it's okay to say hello. And for men, I think it's probably honestly less dating apps and less asking out via DM and just getting more comfortable talking to women as humans first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just going along with some of the stuff you're saying there, that the with some of the women over the years, like that I've known personally, and they're like, Jared, we go out, like my friends, and guys don't approach it, and then their solution is like, oh, we must not be attractive enough, so like they'll get even more dressed up, and like I can tell them, no, you guys look fine.
It's not the problem.
You're terrified. Like the more dolled up you get, especially depending on which bar you're going to, like, I can tell why. And if you're all in a pack like that, that's even more terrifying, because then like you can turn to your friends and go, oh, are you kidding me? You know, and then all three of you are going to roll your eyes at the guy. That's horrifying. And so there's that element, but then also there's the kind of thing too with you're talking about the Me Too and all. It's that the kind of people that would be or that would respond. Remember there was that ad of, you know, where the construction worker's about to go hit on the girl and his buddy pulls him back or whatever.
Yeah.
So the kind of guys watching that and going, oh yeah, right, I should really be. They're not the ones that are going to assault people. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like you're deterring.
You're preaching to the choir.
Yeah, exactly. And so anyway, and then this is not the same kind of thing, but something back when I used to think through this thing, I was thinking, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if there was a situation like somebody like a Britney Spears, where, you know, you read about these celebrities and they end up in abusive relationships. And I think part of that could be, what kind of guy thinks I'm going to go up and ask out Britney Spears when she was in her prime, who's not like deluded in terms of his self-confidence and full of himself. You know what I mean? Like there would be
totally. And
anyway,
it kind of selects away from, I don't want to use the term nice guys, because that comes with a lot of baggage, obviously, but It does genuinely select for guys who probably have fewer nice characteristics, or at least just like are more confident, more outgoing. I think that one of the most overlooked things in dating is that, you know, being a good long-term partner is completely asynchronous with being good at dating. Having a lot of charisma, having a lot of pickup lines, like none of those things lead to being necessarily a good husband or a good father. And so it's fine to want those sorts of things. But I think as a woman, if you want something more important, like giving somebody a chance who maybe doesn't have the most charisma is one of the biggest, widest nets you can cast. But honestly, I think a lot of this comes from the fact that we don't have the natural ways of socializing with one another. A lot of these sort of heightened fears come from the fact that these are total strangers. You don't have, like you said before, it's not as common to ask somebody out from your felt class or somebody that you already have kind of a warm connection to. You already know for sure that they're single because you've heard through the grapevine, you already know that like they come from a certain background and you guys go to church together or whatever. It's literally just like cold calling people based on what they look like, which is probably the hardest way to meet people. I mean, I think telling guys to approach is one thing, but especially if we're talking about perfect strangers, it's really not ideal either. And it's kind of just, you know, one step below dating apps as far as total randomness.
So going to the other end of the spectrum, I'll throw this out there. I'm not saying I endorse this, but I understand now arranged marriages. Like I can see why that's not as insane as like when I was 12. If you said, hey, there's some cultures where there's arranged marriage, like what? That's insane. That's not fair. And you know, all like or movie or, you know, the parents don't approve of this guy or whatever. And I understand now why somebody could think, no, that makes more sense than letting, you know, 18-year-olds marry each other. What the heck do they know?
Totally. Or how are they going to find somebody if they're, you know, in these sort of silos? I've had 2 roommates over the years come from cultures that had arranged marriages. And both of them were super at ease about dating. Both of them were kind of trying to do what they called love marriages, like normal dating to us. But they kind of treated it as, well, you know, I can always just do the arranged marriage. And that one my parents picked out for me. So it's fine. I've seen a picture of him. He seems fine. They didn't know the guys or anything, but I don't know. I mean, my dad certainly has tried to do this over the years where he'll meet somebody random and go, oh, their son lives in DC. And you're like, do you know anything about him? And he goes, oh, he's a Bills fan. I'm like, oh,
Hey, well,
You
that's
know, I
good.
mean,
Yeah.
that's good, I
He
guess.
can deal with disappointment that life throws at him. You know, he's not going to.
You can suffer. And I think that anyone who's willing to put up with the bills can suffer longer. But I mean, it's interesting because I was laughing at my dad for that. Obviously, I mean, it's a text out of the blue, and he goes, "Don't worry, I already gave the kid your number." And you're like, "What are you doing?" But at the same time, I mean, that's effectively what dating apps are doing. It's what dating apps are doing. They're matching you based on general demographic characteristics. General, I think my daughter is about as attractive as this guy. Weird thing to think about. Probably shouldn't have phrased it that way, you know. But you're basically just matching on those sorts of characteristics. It's a third party who goes, "Hey, I talked to him. I know he's single. I talked to her. I know she's single." And they're setting you up.
With the important
except it's your father who actually wants you to get married rather than
I was going to say the important distinction is that the parents presumably care about their children when they're talking and negotiating, whereas the dating app obviously is not concerned about your well-being.
Totally.
Hey folks, let's take a break from the action to talk about the ExPat Money Summit. Now this is an entirely online summit. It's occurring from October 7th through 11th. It's put on by Mikkel Thorpe, who's host of the ExPat Money Show and a highly sought-after expat consultant with over 2 decades of experience. At this summit, you'll learn why international diversification is a must for those looking to preserve their liberty and wealth. You'll learn everything you need to know about crafting your perfect Plan B, how to quickly acquire a second passport, diversify your finances offshore, invest in international real estate, and get in-depth insights on geopolitics from world-renowned experts. These experts include speakers such as Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Scott Horton, Tom Woods, Mark Faber, Tom Luengo, and so forth. I'm actually participating in a VIP panel discussion, and again, you need the VIP pass to be able to check out that particular discussion, which was quite informative. I learned a lot. So to reserve your complimentary ticket, you go to expatmoneysummit.com. But if you want to see the discussion involving old me, then you got to get the VIP pass. Go to expatmoneysummit.com. Use promo code Murphy if you want to get a discount on the tickets and if you want to see my discussion on the VIP panel. Again, that's expatmoneysummit.com. Okay. All right. Very interesting. All right. So let's see. You had mentioned, let's just briefly touch on the video game debate. I thought that one was interesting. Can you explain what that was?
I got skewered so there was totally fake data that was circulating around. It's like I think it was like screenshotted from TikTok, screenshotted from Instagram, screenshotted from like 5 different things. It's like when something goes through a photocopier a million times. One of those things that was floating around that was like top unattractive hobbies for men. And the number one was video games. And it was even rated as more unattractive than I think taxidermy or something crazy, which I stand by. I think taxidermy is kind of cool. But I had tweeted something saying like, oh, like I think a lot of men don't understand how unattractive video games are. Got a lot of heat for this.
Yeah, I saw some of that. Like it was. Now, were you like at ground zero of that? Because I know there were a few women expressing that view that the men came out and then some women too, you know, did.
Yeah, there were a lot of women being like, I play video games and I would love a man who plays it. Like I love that for you, girl. Like the average woman doesn't. And or just it's fine if he plays video games, but it's not that part is attractive. There's lots of unattractive hobbies that people have. In general, I think men tend to have more hobbies and more constructive hobbies than women. Video games just aren't one of them. And that's fine. Not everything you do needs to be attractive to the opposite sex. I think I had like a million caveats underneath it. Didn't matter. I came for video games. I was on the chopping block. I stand by this though. I think video games in general are something that a lot of people really fail to do in small doses. They're also, I understand that there are multiplayer games, but most of those are not with other people in the room. It's not like Mario Kart where everybody's sitting on the same couch. You come over and actually hang out in person. A lot of people are, doing it with people they've never actually met in person, which I understand kind of occasionally, but if that is your primary method of socializing, it's not giving you a lot of the things that true in-person friendships are giving you. And it's kind of guided socialization, which I think is why it's so attractive to people. There's a thing that you're already doing. There really isn't too much room for kind of skewing from what the activity is. So it doesn't lend itself as well to kind of developing holistic friendships. But ultimately, the reason that I mentioned it being unattractive is because I think it matters to people. I think if you are kind of doing the apps or you are going on a first date or something, it's probably not the thing to lead with. I think for men, it's considered a lot more normal than women consider it. Women kind of, a little yellow flag goes up in your brains where you're like, what does he mean he plays video? Like how much or how often, or is this his main hobby? So I just said it because I think it's probably good advice to list out some of your other hobbies. List out the fact that you do taxidermy or roadkill collection or like real, like sexy things to talk about on first dates. Because women go wild for dead animals.
What if you hit a bear and buried it in Central Park or whatever that story was?
RFK is married, isn't he?
Yeah.
I think. See? Exactly.
Yeah.
The man has hobbies. The man likes taxidermy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for people who are like, why you guys, it really was amazing to behold that Allie said something that, she wasn't saying, hey, you losers, stop playing video games, get out of your mom's bed. You weren't mean about it. And like you're saying here, it seemed like it was coming from a place of, hey guys, let me help you out. Don't volunteer this or whatever. And yeah, the people were biting your heads. And yeah, I'm not going to say names now. There's no reason, but
I don't know. But
women that I know in the Austro-libertarian sphere were retweeting you and letting it be known that I'm not like this, using various words to describe women that they don't care for. So
I don't know. I just mute those posts after a while. Like it's kind of funny because it's always the posts that I don't think are, they're not intended to blow up. Like I'm really not putting much thought into them. That always get super controversial. I had also tweeted something about like when women wear kind of little kid clothes and sexualize it. I was like, I find that kind of creepy because it looks like a child and it's really sexualized. Oh my goodness, I angered like the anime community or the Lolita community, which I think if it's called Lolita, that proves my point. I
didn't even know that was such a thing. I've heard of
it. It's
anime.
A Lolita fashion thing. It's like women dressing like little girls. But it's weird to say that it's creepy. I stand by my point. I still muted the post because
right. Yeah.
I don't know, but it's always the ones that you think aren't actually going to get much traffic because it feels like a banal opinion that always blow up in your face and certainly in your DMs.
In general, I would just say I think an issue with Twitter, and I spend a ton of time on there, and I get in fights with people all the time. But what am I trying to say? If you go in there thinking, oh, progressives or environmentalists or MAGA people or men or women are monsters and my camp is so much better than these morons / evil people, you will see what you want to see. Like, you know what I mean? Just like you're saying, like if somebody's saying, oh, these poor men are afraid of rejection and they might, ask somebody out innocently and then get blasted and everyone, passes around. To give you an example, did you see the thing, Allie, where somebody said something like, hey, how come, there's, what was it? All these women are complaining about, where are all the men, but they reject men all the time. Or, my guy friends and then some lady retweeted that and said, well, this young guy at my church finally worked up the courage to approach his crush. And he asked her on the first conversation what her favorite spider was.
Yeah.
And everybody's all laughing and ha, ha, ha. Or she said, so maybe that should shed some light on this phenomenon, right? And so my reaction to that was, this poor kid obviously is very nervous around girl. For all we know, he's 16, and an older woman at his church use the opportunity to mock him to strangers. Like, what the heck?
Insane.
Right.
Yeah.
But then you can say it, but at the same time, I know women could say, let me show you the thousands of unsolicited pictures that I get on a daily basis on this web. So no, it's not just that, oh yeah, the women are the problem. So the point is like, yeah, there's awful stuff on both sides. And if you go into it wanting to be bitter, you're going to find what you want to see.
There's more than enough to be bitter about. There was that tweet going around that was like 80% of Twitter is people saying, imagine a guy, and then getting mad at the guy that they're imagining. Like, a lot of these things aren't even people that exist. I get people in my replies all the time being like, I bet you, blah, 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 you've had 45 abortions. And you're like, whoa, first of all, what? Second of all, did you come up with something in your head and then get mad at me for it? That doesn't make any sense. I have gotten much more liberal with the mute button. But I only really started using Twitter back in I think March or April or something. So I'm kind of new here.
2024?
Kind of yeah.
Wow. I thought we've been friends longer. Okay.
Sorry. In my heart.
No, I'm not mad at, no, I'm not saying, I'm not saying that did come off funny. All I meant was I thought that I was following you on Twitter, for a year at least is what I'm getting at.
There's probably a lot of blonde conservative women out there.
No,
if I had
I'm
to
not
guess.
mixing you up for somebody else. That's not what's going on. I believe you. I could be mistaken about how long we've been following each other on Twitter. I'm just saying, no, fair. I'm not mixing you up. Wait, you're Ann Coulter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Totally. And here's what I have to say on behalf of, does she work for Fox? I think.
I don't know what she's doing now. Maybe.
I don't know.
She's kind of her own thing now. She's her own enterprise.
No, but there's a lot to be bitter about. I think that's kind of why keeping it in context in your brain, whatever it is, whether it's dating apps, whether it's Twitter, if I got my view of men from Twitter, I don't think I'd ever talk to them again.
Right.
I'm really, really glad that I have guy friends, that I have wonderful men in my life, because they kind of remind me that, this is actually just a self-selected, very small minority of very miserable people, largely. And certainly the ones who self-select into my DM requests and send me voice notes of all the things they find wrong with my face. That was a wild one. It was a voice note. So you could hear him trying to sound upsetting. I don't know. It was a weird experience. I played it for some of my friends. That one I did play for my friends. If you're going to mock my face in my DMs, I found that funny.
Wait, that's a thing? You can send a voice? I
didn't know that either. It was an audio. Yeah, it's an audio note.
And so you were like, what's this? And then someone's literally itemizing the problems with your face?
Yeah.
Wow.
So maybe he's a plastic surgery consultant or something, but I don't have that kind of money. So unless they're looking for a charity case, I can't really help them out. But no, genuinely, if it's also interesting because I'll get very occasional DMs that are I love what you're doing. Thank you for being a good voice. Really support you. And they're few and far between, but they're wonderful. But then I kind of remember that 95% of the people that I adore on Twitter, I don't tell them. You're really only going to get into discussions with people that you disagree with. So I think, I don't know. It's like alcohol. You should never use Twitter when you're upset. If it's starting to get you upset or you feel your mood getting off, just log off. It's not worth it to get into a fight with somebody. It's not worth it to actually let that get you worked up. It's not real. And I don't know. Maybe for all my hating on video games, it's a version of video games. There's just little aliens everywhere yelling at you.
Okay, let's transition to your environmental work. So so again, you're a fellow with the Conserve America group. What do they do?
So Conserve America is kind of trying to be thought leaders on what we call the eco right. There's a kind of an ecosystem of conservative environmentalists, which is interesting because the number one piece of feedback I always get on that is I don't think that's a thing, or I think that's an oxymoron. Mm-hmm. I was on the plane next to somebody and I had a sticker on my water bottle or something. And he goes, oh yeah, I'm really into environmentalism. I hate Trump. And I went, that is fascinating. We have a 2-hour plane ride together. This is probably not the best time for me to be I love the environment and I'm a Republican. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a lot more.
I didn't even. So Conserve America, is that
Conservative.
Because conservative. Okay, geez, I didn't even catch. I mean, I knew it was a right
It's pretty nifty.
leaning group, but that didn't even click with me. Okay, good.
I like to think that we get to like totally claim the word conservation. I don't know if we've really won the right to do that yet. But effectively just kind of trying to understand what conservative environmentalism sounds like, looks like, etc. And then I also do work with American Conservation Coalition. I've led chapters for them. I'm starting one up in Ohio right now. And that's much more like Gen Z focused and younger center-right groups. Both groups are big on kind of market environmentalism and kind of finding win-wins for the environment without completely trying to tank the economy while we're at it. But I think in general, the conservative environmentalism, I think is pretty cool because it's not just based on, oh my goodness, humans are going extinct kind of rhetoric. It's a lot more constructive, a lot more grassroots, a lot more focused on individual agency and individual action.
Well, one of the things I liked about like Murray Rothbard's work, I mean, this is going back, to the 60s probably, 70s for sure, that I'm thinking of specific things he's written, where he was, saying the libertarian stance, it's not like pro-business and, hey, let the business, dump chemicals in the river because at least we can make cheaper TVs and boost GDP and rah, 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 and worrying about the quality of the water is, that's some pointy-headed, that's what Barbara Streisand worries about. And he was saying, no, it's libertarians' property rights. And actually, it used to be back in the day that if the factory was emitting smoke and that was, getting on your laundry, if you're, hanging your laundry, you could get an injunction against that. But then it was the government that kind of threw out those property rights and said, no, we got to have industrialization for progress. And so it was government intervention that trampled on, the rights of the property owners and allowed for corporate pollution and stuff like that. So it wasn't either, you got to be either pro-business or pro-conservation. It was, property rights. And then that's the mechanism through which if people care about, the river getting chemicals dumped in it, well, the owner of the river will take action, or the people downstream that, are having their property rights violated can do something and go to the court system. So rather than having it be a political solution, his point was it's not the free market that led to pollution problems. It was government intervention thinking, this is, it's more important to promote industry or something.
100%. And I think that you see this kind of demonstrated on the small scale where property owners are much more likely to even pick up a piece of trash in their neighborhood than somebody just renting. Like you feel kind of a natural instinctive ownership over where you live. But also, I mean, if you end up getting a lot of trash flowing into your neighborhood, your HOA might band together and hire people. You might just hire somebody to be cleaning up trash regularly. You have kind of that built-in incentive by virtue of your property to be fixing it. And one of the things that I think frustrates me a lot about how conservatives especially young conservatives have bought into environmentalism as a lefty movement is the fact that you'll hear young conservatives talk about graffiti as if it's like just this stain on humanity. And I can't imagine living in a neighborhood like that. And it's a very conservative thing to want to get rid of graffiti. And then you talk about, should we make the water clean? Should we make the air clean? And they go, I'm not into that progressive BS. Like, interesting. Okay, well, it is the same. I mean, that's your home too. It's as much your home just because it's a tree or a stream as much as it is, an actual building. And I think with properly understood concepts of property or properly internalized, which is much easier to do than to understand it in an academic sense, people get that. My dad certainly is not like a political philosopher by any means, but I remember him when I was 5 years old going to a town board meeting and reading the lore acts because we had trees behind our house that were going to be cut down. And he goes, no, I like the trees. They're good for my property value. And my kids play in them. And it really was just kind of a property incentive that led to that. But conservation happened naturally as a result because all of our neighbors kind of banded together about that. We didn't need to have kind of a top-down intervention saying we need X trees per square mile. And that's how we're going to create these greater, emissions targets or whatever. It truly just does happen naturally to a certain degree, which I find quite compelling. And I think it aligns with the way that a lot of people think about their backyards, but might not think about the whole country on that big of a scale.
Right. Maybe the last thing we can hit here is you mentioned when you were sending me some topic ideas that you're saying there's actually, like, among younger people, the support for nuclear energy is higher now than maybe it would have been 20 years ago.
Yeah, no, it's I saw a stat that was like 3 in 4 members of Gen Z are now pro-nuclear, which I find awesome. I think it's one of those things that my grandpa was a nuclear guy, and so I think I grew up in our family and it was never a bad word. And then you meet people and they'll say, well, I'm an environmentalist, so I'm not really into nuclear. And you go, wait, why? Like, that's actually our largest source of clean energy. It's the safest source of clean energy, or energy period that we have. Right. But I think it's kind of heartening to me that young people are more pro-nuclear, because we're kind of getting out of the generations where people were doing atom bomb drills and living with kind of this Cold War understanding of nuclear equals death. Or even some of the like nuclear meltdowns that got, I think, more bad press than they needed to.
Like 3 Mile Island and stuff. Is that what you mean?
Like 3 Mile Island. I mean, you ask people how many people died in 3 Mile Island and they go, oh, like 10,000. And you go, 0. Like, nope, nobody died. It was properly contained. Everything worked the way it was. Yeah.
I mean, I think probably too, nowadays, more people say, what's 3 Mile Island? I don't even know what that is.
Yes. And also true. I mean, and so maybe young people are too dumb to have those sorts of, or too uninformed to have those sorts of pushbacks. But I think a lot of them are at least open to the idea. And I think in general, conservatives are starting to develop a bit more of a vocabulary around how we talk about energy issues, in part in response to how kind of self-destructive a lot of the progressive narratives have gone, of just humanity is a scourge on the earth. That is our new original sin, is just existing. Nothing will ever be good enough. And like, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, those sorts of narratives that I don't think resonate with anybody. Whereas conservatives, I think, are finally getting to the point of going, all right, like, this is actually an energy security problem. We want energy and we want lots of it. And we can't just constantly reduce the amount of consumption that we have. That's completely unsustainable for human flourishing. Babies need to be on incubators, and people need lights on in their house, and economies don't grow unless you have energy to make them grow. However that's supposed to happen. And I think talking about it more from an energy security standpoint, and how do we grow the economy? How do we be pro-human, really pro-property, pro-human flourishing, I think is much more in line with having more energy that is clean, than just constantly reducing our impact and honestly just making life crappier for the average person. I don't think anyone wants to give up their AC. I don't think anyone wants to just like constantly eat less or, eat more bugs. People just want enjoyable lives. And I think if we can find a vision of environmentalism that speaks to them, it's a much more compelling future for people than those who want everybody to give up their cars and cool houses.
Yeah. Did you see the thing? So within the last week, I think floating around, I think it was the New Yorker talking about, I got rid of my AC and you should too, or something like that. It really is like, there is a campaign to get people to eat bugs and give up their AC.
Which is wild, because you'll totally be gaslit if you talk about it. I mean, in grad school, there was a campaign to get rid of meat in our cafeteria, which is crazy because, I mean, I don't know. I had posted something about like, I think climate change is fixable on Twitter. And I had half the crowd be like, climate change isn't real. And the other half being like, what does fixable mean? I'm like, well, fixable is what any environmental challenge is. This doesn't mean that we reverse it back to zero. It means, okay, in the context of what it takes for us to live well with the environment and not have people's homes flooding and not have people experiencing deleterious effects from the way that the climate is changing, we can adapt to that. I mean, if we look at the Netherlands, and they've always had, dams put up because otherwise their country would flood. Okay, they fixed it. Like, it is currently functioning. They didn't completely fix the fact that the ocean exists on their doorstep. They didn't fix the fact that they live in the Netherlands. Maybe they should, I don't know. But they fixed it such that humans can live well, and it's not actively a disaster. I consider that to be fixing it. And I think that we kind of set unrealistic standards when we say that, okay, we need to be completely emissions free. Okay, well, breathing is not emissions free. Like, try again. That's not fixing it. Okay, we need to be natural disaster free. Right, natural disasters completely exist without humans. Earthquakes happen and tornadoes happen. It really has to be fixated on human flourishing as like the chief good, and I think responsible stewardship of creation. Otherwise, you very much lose the plot, because there's no other standard for us to live by. And if we make emission standards 0, like, you're setting yourself up to fail, and you're setting yourself up to just freak out anytime they go above that.
Yeah, I spent years on this stuff, the economics of climate change, when I worked for the Institute for Energy Research. And one thing that jumped out at me was I doubted most of the environmental activists talking about climate change, because they were also stridently anti-nuclear. And it was like, well, if you care about it, we're right. If you really thought that, humanity needs to really reduce their emission, carbon dioxide emissions by X% over the next 10 years, nuclear is the only way to do it. That's the only way it's going to happen. People are not going to cut their standard of living in half. And yet they were against it. For instance, to me, that showed, no, this is a proxy for they don't like capitalism, which
genuinely,
and I'm not, guessing, like many of them openly said that. Yeah.
Yeah. And they've started, I think the mask has started coming off in a lot of ways. It really just is about degrowth. That's why nuclear isn't good enough. That's why none of these cost saving measures or innovations are good enough. It genuinely is about anti-capitalism and believing that is the solution to original center. Like, that's at least the way that we repent for it.
Yeah. And another one too, was this on your radar when I think they called it Super Freakonomics came out? So there was the book Freakonomics, and then this was the sequel, and they did all kinds of stuff in there, but one of the I guess it was a chapter, was on solutions to climate change, and they just kind of did quick interviews and vignettes of this guy's working on pumping, putting, like, having balloons floating around emitting
carbon capture.
Well, carbon capture is one of them.
Direct.
That was a different one where we're going to like seed the oceans and get all kinds of algae blooms that would suck up the CO2. But this one was what is it? Sulfur dioxide, right? So like when Mount Pinatubo erupted, global temperatures measurably dropped for a bit. As all this stuff's in the atmosphere reflecting the sunlight, and then it went away. And so that was kind of the idea, like, well, couldn't we just do that on our own? And the point wasn't that it would be a long-term solution, but you could buy a decade that way. You know what I mean? Like, just pump this stuff up. And so anyway, this chapter just dealt with a bunch of things like that. Or could we come up with genetically engineered trees that they absorb more carbon than, the standard thing does, and plant those, all kinds of things that people were working on, like you say, carbon capture or whatever. And the thing was, like, any of these ideas, like, maybe they'd work, maybe they wouldn't, but it was like, it was going to solve the problem at 1/10,000th of the cost of having the globe just drastically reduce carbon dioxide emissions. And the reaction from, like, the leftist intellectuals who were in this stuff that were calling for carbon taxes and blah, 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 was just insane. Like, how much they demonize these people. And these are, like, criminal crimes against humanity. Because you're not supposed to solve it. Right, because that was the thing. They didn't actually want to solve it. Like, no, the solution is mankind has sinned against nature, and we need to have penance in this technological fix. So they didn't say that, of course. They said it as, no, this is just going to delay the painful real solutions that we're trying to implement, and this is going to give the politicians a chance to kick the can down the road and say, oh, let's just hang on and wait for this quick fix that'll do it without all the pain. But anyway, it just, like, if we really thought there was an asteroid coming that was going to blow up the planet in 20 years, I think different scientists around the world would be working on 19 different possible solutions to see which is what this book was talking about, saying if climate change really is this existential threat, we want different scientists brainstorming, how do we know that reducing CO2 is the solution?
Well, and I mean, in the meantime, you're just breaking trust with people, because I mean, I remember being in kindergarten in the early thousands and hearing like, oh, we've only got 10 years left to live or something, or 20 years left to live. And here I am in 2024 and we're still super alive. I mean, I'm in Ohio, but God forbid, like there's worse things in life. And I think it's like boy who cried wolf. And we saw this with COVID with a lot of different people saying, oh, everyone's going to die. And then they didn't. And now nobody trusts those experts anymore. You see this with climate as well. There are things that we should be innovating around. I think a lot of people who are trying to get insurance for their places in the Mountain West or on coastal Florida, they have genuine property reasons to like want to solve these sorts of things. But you can't solve something if we ignore it entirely. But that's, I think, the logical response from a lot of people who've just been lied to by people fear-mongering for years. We also kind of forget that a lot of the current things that we have are innovations. Michael Schellenberger has an awesome example in Apocalypse Never, where he talks about the fact that plastic straws, which we currently view as being an enemy to turtles, were kind of the byproduct of the fact that we developed a lot of plastics to save turtles originally, because we used to use turtle shells, tortoise shell sunglasses and things. They're very pliable. They are plastic, used, small p plastic as an adjective. And we developed what we now know as plastic to save turtle shells because people were just killing turtles and taking their shells. Now we've realized we need to innovate around that. Maybe that means plastic eating bacteria. Maybe that means bioplastics or more biodegradable things. I do think on some level, and Americans are allergic to this, like I think we probably should be a little bit more conscious of how much we're consuming, as much on a personal, spiritual level as anything else. Like we are very much consumerist addicts. But I don't know. I mean, I think that to believe that the only way out is to have less humanity, less kids, less human flourishing, and less consumption, period, is a very self-hating attitude. And it's, I think, kind of interesting that a lot of the fear-mongering for this is an apocalypse, when it sounds like for a lot of these activists, that's exactly what they view as ideal. You can't simultaneously want humans to be wiped off the face of the planet and then be using that as your worst case scenario. Like that is effectively what you guys want to do in a slower way.
Yeah. And in some of my more cynical moments, I think that it's not a carbon, it's like carbon-based life and everything. And then they're anti-carbon. Like that's the thing. And it's not, they're I think they're anti-life. And and many of them will openly talk about that. And we could get down to 500 million people. That's sustainable. And So I'm not grasping at straws, plastic or paper. Okay. Well, that's probably a good place to wrap up. My guest, folks, has been Alina Clough, a fellow with Conserve America. Allie, as she goes by. If people want to find more, where can they follow you on Twitter for all the Battle of the Sexes stuff? And then I don't know if you want to give a link. Can they go for the environmental stuff?
I genuinely post everything on my main Twitter. So you get a mixed bag of both. So if you want to do Battle of the Sexes or me occasionally posting about nuclear energy, I'm on Twitter at Cluffalo, Cluffalo.
Okay, great. Well, Allie, thanks so much for your time and your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. See you next time.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.